And so the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about identity and waxing a bit philosophical in some respects. I try to bring it back to practicality and mindfulness practice, because that's the theme here. And today, I'd like to talk about what I consider fairly practical points. I'm calling it 12 reminders on the path of mindfulness. And since I like to stay within about a 15-minute boundary for these talks, I like to cover each of these points for about 1 minute. So if one of these points strikes you in a particularly relevant way, I invite you to jot it down and we can discuss after the talk. Because some of these might be very apparent to you, others of these may really speak to you in a very personal way. The first reminder is that everything is workable. Everything is workable. I believe I first encountered that statement. It was either with studying through the Shambhala lineage or perhaps the work of Pema Chodron, who has previously been associated with the Shambhala lineage. And for me, the term or phrase, everything is workable, insight on the path of joy, because if everything's workable, then we have the conditions to access joy in our life. Now, of course, when we're in great pain, we don't necessarily think everything is workable. For me, that teaching means that if we're on this path of learning how to orient our minds, our bodies, our hearts in a way to create peace and liberate ourselves from suffering, then even the most challenging event in our life can still be workable when we bring that presence of mindfulness and the teachings and the insights to the process. I'm not suggesting we meditate away pain, but rather we can open to whatever is there. Years ago, I ran across a reworking of Shakespeare's "All's well that ends well," and the statement becomes all's well that ends well. And if it's not well, it's not the end. So this kind of thinking, there's always a process there that can create some sort of peaceful completion. The other reminder on the path of mindfulness is that you can return again and again to the body and breath. This might seem very simple, but I find it very, very profound, because often when we're in pain, we're creating a very wild story, a narrative in our mind. And when we can drop that story and return to our body and breath as a resource, then we can stay connected, for one. And for two, we can begin to rest or relax or let go through the body. I had this experience just the other day. On Wednesday morning, I was in a chair, and about a 6'6", 250-pound man was going to pull two of my wisdom teeth. Yes, he is my dentist. And I found myself naturally tensing, which is pretty normal given the circumstance. And even though it wasn't so much a wild mind, it was a tension I'm not normally used to carrying. And when I became aware of that, yes, I dropped my shoulders and I softened my belly, and everything just flowed along. So the body can be a great resource when we remember to return to it. Body and breath, body and breath. The next reminder is that you can let go of judgment and befriend yourself. That's always a possibility. Essentially, this is a relative truth in the sense that if you're befriending yourself, then you've just created two selves. Here we are to this issue of self-identity again. One who is hurting over the judgment, maybe, and the other who is befriending. So in a more absolutistic sense, we can say instead of befriending yourself, just be friendly. Be friendly. Connect with the beingness of friendliness. And of course, that extends to that person you call yourself, as well as the world and other people. But when we connect with friendliness, we want to make sure that it's palpable, it's tangible, it's not just some intellectual concept. How does being friendly register? What does it feel like? What does the friend sound like, speak like, think like, walk like? The other reminder, next reminder, number 4, is that if you can't let go, then let be. And if you can't let be, because that could be cumbersome, just let. That is, just allow for whatever is there to be there, including your attachments and suffering, if that is there, but without dissociating your so-called self or experience, without dissociating from yourself, your body, or your experience of reality. So this is the process of allowing. Ideally, it's about allowing without any added ingredients, allowing without the story that tends to burden us. So, for example, an attachment to a person, a thought, a judgment, anything or experience is actually a way that we create an identity. Let that sink in. Any attachment to a person, thought, judgment, or thing or experience is a way that we create an identity. And this identity based upon an attachment is a setup for suffering, a setup for suffering. So this is about craving, addiction, perhaps, an outgrowth of the need to make something that's empty, our thoughts, into something that's solid, like a belief system. So what are the footprints, so to speak, metaphorically? What are the footprints of attachment? A few that come to mind are a strong emotional reaction to yourself, someone else, a belief, whatever that is. A sense of self-righteousness. Also confusing something that you want with something that you need. It's often what we want. That's the craving, that's the desire. It's not necessarily what we need. Contrary to what the marketers out there want us to believe. And of course, this is pretty apparent. Attachment can be reflected in thoughts and behaviors that are obsessed with the object of desire. Very readily seen in addiction to substances, but also with people or even certain activities. Moving on to reminder number 5, all feelings are temporary. All feelings are temporary. A little footnote here. This is a very challenging reminder when we are in our emotional pain, when we are in emotional pain. And I don't know about you, but I can reflect on times in my life when I've been in emotional pain and that insight from mindfulness practice was not available. In fact, this was before I practiced mindfulness in a very consistent way, where when we're in that pain, it seems like that is our reality and there may be no way out. And it sort of can feel hopeless for some of us. And yet when we remember this is temporary, but not as a band-aid of temporality, but rather as a sense of support that there is more than this feeling that will not always be present. The next reminder, number 6, is that anxiety, stress, and anger can become our allies when we allow them to remind us, again, to return to our body, to relax and directly experience the present moment without identifying with a story. This brings to mind the Lojong saying, the mind training saying in the Tibetan lineage of let poison be your medicine, let poison be your medicine, so that if we are encountering something very significantly painful in our life, be that internal, external relationship or otherwise, that can be the place where we soften, where we might grieve, where we might just stay open, where we might practice compassion and kindness, where we might get out of our fictional identity and see that person in front of us also has a history and also has been subjected to conditions and also may be in pain or suffering. Easier said than done, but a very worthy practice, a very worthy practice. So number 7 reminder is that you can allow yourself to be present and open rather than trying to feel good. So this is an essential mindfulness practice. The stereotype of meditation is that this is a practice that takes us to the place of bliss. And when it does take us to the place of bliss, that's wonderful. But beyond any particular state, meditation is not about being in a certain feeling state. It's about being wherever you are. So be present and open rather than meditating to feel good. Yeah. So reminder number 8 is remember your intention for meditating. Remember your intention for meditating. This is a very important one. The psychologist Shauna Shapiro and her associates say there are 3 essential components of mindfulness meditation. The first is intention. The other is attention. And the last one is attitude, or primary attitude of acceptance. So intention, attention, and acceptance, or attitude. So remember our intention, your intention for meditating. For some, it might be calming. For others, it might be focusing, attention. For others, it might be supporting your physical and emotional health, maybe stress or pain management, or maybe even the E word, enlightenment. I'm not about to define enlightenment at this time. I was musing about it, and I think that we can stalk the footprints of enlightenment like this. If you encounter someone on the path, or maybe in a flash, you find yourself experiencing love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, what we call the 4 virtues of mindfulness practice. Love, compassion, joy, and equanimity inside, in the face of changing external conditions. That's a pretty good footprint possibility of some degree of enlightenment, some degree of enlightenment. The wise woman, Byron Katie, says, enlightenment is just a story. That's what we're relating to, a story about enlightenment. Some people think it's a great advertisement for meditation. So regardless of all the stories, she says, Byron Katie says something to the effect of, if you've ever in a moment been at peace, you've been enlightened in that moment, So perhaps we all can get that glimpse of enlightenment without making it into an ego identity and something we need to put into a box. So reminder number 9, moving along here. When you're uncomfortable, ask yourself, what am I resisting? What am I resisting? It's a common equation in mindfulness culture to say that suffering equals pain times resistance. For the therapists out there or in your own personal practice, look at that equation. I'm not a big fan of formulas, but it's a fun equation to explore in a nonlinear way. Suffering equals pain times resistance. If we live long enough, we experience pain, pain of loss, pain of distress, pain of illness, pain of letting go of something or someone. And if we accept that and stay open, then the river of emotions flows along. If we resist that experience, we create tension, and that can lead to suffering. Number 10, although stress and anger are contagious, so is kindness. And so about over 40 years ago now, maybe 45 years ago, I was doing research on emotional experience for my master's program. And I came across this wonderful concept, which most of you, I think, are aware of. It's called emotional contagion. The idea that human beings, when we are together, there's a tendency to match our emotional expressions. Just hang around someone who's very negative and judgmental, and you'll feel that resonance, perhaps, especially if you're a highly sensitive person or just open and empathic, And yet when we're with uplifting people, of course, we're more likely to feel that sense of uplift. So be aware of not only your influence, but how others can influence you. To the degree we're mindful, we don't necessarily have to get co-opted into someone else's emotional energy field, so to speak. Number 11, your thoughts are not true. They are not who you are. I like this one in particular. I think because there's a lot of storytelling going inside my mind. I don't know about your mind. There may be. I think it's a very human thing. And when we identify with those thoughts, that can lead us astray to the present moment, certainly in the form of distractions. But also if those thoughts are not particularly skillful, helpful thoughts, if they're judgmental thoughts, aggressive thoughts, thoughts based on ignorance or clinging attachment, that can really predispose us to suffering and emotional pain. So I find it to be a very helpful reminder that my thoughts just aren't so true. Now they may point to a truth, like the car in front of my car is a car, Now, the thought itself is not true, but that car in front of me is true. So thoughts, point toward a truth. And the last reminder, which might be the most important of all, and it is lighten up, lighten up. Your sense of humor can be a great ally when you are encountering the ridiculousness of your thoughts, speech, and actions. I sometimes get accused of having a sense of humor, and yet my shadow side is sometimes, if not oftentimes, too serious for my own good, So that sense of humor, if there is any strain of that, I'm striving for it all the time, is, something that I think probably grew out of a defense formation during my childhood, as I think back upon it. And that's fine. It doesn't have to control me or you. So a sense of humor is not something we want to develop or cultivate or use to cover up our feelings. But we can also lean into a sense of humor to create space from the seriousness of our attachments to our stories or to people, places, and things that otherwise could become a source of our emotional pain. And so those are the 12 reminders, my friend,